Welcome, everyone. Hi, to the Discipline Working Group. I thought I would start tonight by just having a more conversational style review of what our approach to discipline is, and then maybe touching on where some of the disconnect is. And I know that we've been tasked with reviewing our discipline policy and figuring out how it's going to affect our budget and making some recommendations for budgetary implications. So, welcome. First, I want to start off with kind of referring to the committee and seeing, after reviewing the materials and our current approach to discipline, what your impression is, and hearing some feedback that you've gotten from your conversations in the community and what we've heard here at previous meetings. I know for me, when I read through the materials, our integrated student supports framework, I was very impressed with how thorough it is. It's a bit complicated, and I see how maybe the implementation varies from building to building within our school system, and how maybe figuring out how maybe we can address the disconnect. What do you all see as I guess the varying experiences across the county when it comes to discipline?
So I would kind of echo what you're talking about with the integrated student supports. COAB, I think, we're in 4th or 5th year of utilizing the COAB. This is the first year that we put it in a document that also has our expectations around tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and how we really set schools up for environments that support student learning. My concern with COAB when we first started using it is that, number one, there was the expectation that somehow the COAB would keep kids from acting out. That's not going to happen. And number two, that it would immediately create it to where everybody was in line and interacting with it the same way. It's a document of guidance. Speaking to a board member through text message earlier, I think the big issue is just there is still a lot of variability across 76 campuses of how we interpret, how we execute, and consistently implement it. I mean, Dr. Stewart, if you would.
Yeah, I think the only thing that I would just reinforce is the COAB is really designed to say when a specific behavior occurs, this is the consequence it can receive, and there's a range. What the integrated student supports is intended to do is to really support schools in their ability to create the conditions that in fact lead to fewer behaviors at the classroom level, at the school level, and so on and so forth. And so sometimes when we spend too much time thinking about the right consequence for said behavior, we miss the boat on making sure that we're doing what we need to be doing on the front end. And so this is a very intentional move on our ends to kind of say, schools, let's step back, let's make sure we have the expectations. Kids understand what they are, we're communicating them clearly, we're reinforcing them regularly about who we are as a school. And then when the kids aren't able to meet those expectations, then we need to take a next step. But I think that's why it's in this kind of continuum, and I think it was a really important move, for us to make.
I agree. I was very impressed with the approach, like what I consider solutions-based approach to discipline, going at the root of what's going on, either in the classroom or with a particular student, and addressing the root of the behavior instead of just punishing the behavior. So I was really impressed. Like I said, this is an excellent document, and it is very thorough. I'm wondering where the disconnect is as far as why we see such different discipline experiences across campuses. Is it implementation? Is it understanding? Is it resources? is it a combination of those things? But I'd also like to hear from the other board members about, what they think about having all of this in one place as far as our approach to student behavior.
Well, I tell you, the main thing that I hear from teachers, basically, they don't feel like they're getting enough support in the from the administration, whether it's most of the time in their own buildings, and since I'm getting it from so many different schools, some of them, a lot of them not even in my district, I'm wondering if it's coming from the district. I don't know, what do we call them anymore? We call them so many different things.
Community superintendents.
Community superintendents it is now. And I'm not sure where they're getting that, if they're getting it from the central offices, this is the way we're handling things or whatever. But teachers just do not feel like that they have complained about certain instances, and that the kids do not respect them at all because they send them for punishment. We say we want to try to do all of these other things to make it conducive to where kids won't misbehave, and you've already said there's nothing we can do to keep kids from misbehaving. They're going to misbehave, and there has to be some kind of punishment. And I think the pendulum has swung so far the other way that when you don't punish kids that are doing things bad, it's not fair to the good kids. And I think this is where we are. That we're so worried that we're going to punish someone too much, or that the teachers say they send kids to be disciplined and they send them right back to their class. And they say it undermines them, and so sometimes they say they don't even send them anymore. They just allow them just to go ahead and misbehave in class, and they just try to do the best they can to struggle through the class. Because if they continue to send them to the office and the office continues to send them back to the classroom, they say that makes them look foolish, and they're just tired of dealing with it. And so a lot of people just say that they're just going to keep on till they bide their time till they can retire. That we do not need teachers that are just waiting to retire. And I've said it ever since I've been on this board. Teachers would rather have a well-disciplined classroom than a raise. They can teach. They'd rather have a well-disciplined classroom than a smaller classroom. And I think the more we monkey around with this and try to figure out ways to pacify kids and let them cool down and all this, well, there's some kids in class that don't want to give your kid time to cool down. They're there to get an education. And they're not there to try to work through whatever social ills you have or whatever. The kids get a one shot at an education. One shot. And while we're monkeying around with all this, trying to do all this social engineering and making sure, being bean counters and being sure we do all of the things that we're supposed to do, the state says it's not coming from them. We say it's not coming from us. It's like a circular firing squad. I've called the state representatives and said, well, we're being told the state sends us this stuff and we have to abide by these rules and regulations. And the state are saying, hey, that stuff didn't come from us. Well, it's coming from somebody. Nobody really wants to take ownership of it, but I'm telling you, we have teachers who are my friends who have said they have never seen the classrooms in the disarray that they are now, and that they want something done. And a lot of them are going to either private schools or some other kind of school to keep from dealing with this, because in private schools they don't put up with this nonsense. And because their parents have vested interest in the schools, and I wish the parents would see that they have a vested interest, and I think some of them do and are demanding a change. But we're going to have to get a handle on discipline, because I've heard stories that I won't go in here now because I don't want to throw any of these teachers under the bus, but I've heard some situations this year that I am just absolutely blown away by. Absolutely blown away by. And things that we're doing to make concessions to keep children in the classrooms. And I still say one of the big problems I see that we have is, I brought it up at a school board meeting a couple of months ago. If a kid is 19 years old and they are not on track to graduate, they do not need to be in our school building. They need to go away. They need to go to adult high school. They need to get a GED. They need to go do whatever they need to do. We have so many 19-year-old kids causing problems in our schools, and they do not need to be there. And I think at the first of the year, that's one place that we can really get a handle on discipline right from the beginning. Class, if you start a senior year, you're 19 years old, or even a junior at 19 years old, you do not need to be in the schoolhouse. You are now an adult, because on one hand you have to treat them like an adult, but on another hand they're in there with a bunch of minors. And you can't have different rules for them as everybody else. But that's one thing I think that the principals need to be clear on.
Sure.
That you need, that they just need to be, I don't even think they even need to have a choice. If they turn 19 during the year, maybe, but starting at 19, no way.
So I'll go back to a couple things. Question is that implementation, understanding, resources. I think it's all three. And to Ms. Thurman's comments, I think it's important for us to learn lessons from across the district. I think in every single one of your districts, you probably have examples of where practices aren't going well and examples of where they're going very well. We have some schools that are really well run, that they're where they need to be, they handle things appropriately, and then we have some that aren't quite where they need to be. And to the last point, and I'll link this to the resources comment about 19-year-olds. I think in that same meeting 2 months ago, if it wasn't in that meeting, it was another one, I talked about in the years I've been in Hamilton County, one of the big issues is that there is a lack of options for schools. I mean, you kind of have, right now we've got ISS monitors. From there you can go to out of school suspension, then it's all the way to Washington, where we need options for, I would argue, before the kid turned 19. If we see a kid that's 16 and a half that is undercredited, we need to intervene then in a different setting to allow that student to get back on track. And I'm not saying the student can't get back on track and come back to school, but we don't want 19-year-olds that aren't graduating in schools. We need to have other options for them. So one of the things we're looking at, and I think you'll see it coming throughout the spring in budget conversations and in individual conversations with you guys about staffing and other things, that we're looking to invest a lot of money into school-based options. Some of them will obviously provide the flexibility to opt into a program, but a lot of them are focused on things that you're talking about in terms of providing support to teachers in the classroom and making sure that we are able to quickly and appropriately deal with discipline issues when they happen. Comment about, can't do, some kids are going to act out. I mean, you can ask my parents. I was one of those kids for about 4 years. But you can set up structures for what we would say, I mean, even in the integrated student supports, it talks about it. I mean, there's going to be a small percentage of kids that in a typical school won't function well, and we do need to have other options besides just Washington available to schools. And so a big thing of it, in my opinion, in terms of at the school level, is the resourcing that we've provided to schools to make decisions that better support kids.
I agree, Jill. These are beautiful documents, and we do this a lot. Got such a talented team out here. It puts this information stuff together for us, and it just looks so good and it's beautiful, and then we never do anything with it. And I was telling Jill just a few minutes ago, I've been working with behavior problem kids for 35 years now, and the bottom line is I think as a school system, and not just a school system, but the world, have become tolerant of the intolerant. And we just seemingly put up with things that they're just not acceptable. And we talk a lot Justin, about facilities and what a crisis it is and where we're at with that. I don't think facilities is near the crisis of the behavior culture that has percolated and has been allowed to be birthed in our school system.
Can I push back on that for a second?
Not yet.
Okay.
I've got twin granddaughters over at East Hamilton. They're great kids, great students. I mean, they're straight A's. They got that from Mimi. They didn't get it from me. You didn't have to agree. But what's interesting, I was having a conversation with them over the holidays, and they were telling me that they don't even want to go to school because one or two kids in their various classes are being allowed to disrupt the entire milieu. And, I think when you look at behavior holistically, I bet less than 10% of our students are causing 99% of our problems. And we talk a lot about disproportionate share of numbers of discipline referrals, and we talk about that a lot around here. And what's troubling to me, I've asked for the numbers and have never been able to get them. I asked multiple times. I do know that one of my principals in the month of November had 30-something discipline episodes. And those 30-something discipline episodes, about 26 of them were created by 2 kids. But it still counted as a discipline episode. So I think that number, when we talk about disproportionate suspension for minorities, I think that number is skewed because of that. And I don't pretend to have the answer. I don't. But it's complicated, it's multifaceted, and very complex. But if we don't get a handle on it, we can't educate kids, and that's heartbreaking. I said from the beginning, and I'll hush and let you push back a little bit, Justin, but I said from the beginning that the Code of Acceptable Behavior, I think, is a good document. I think it is, but I think the problem is it's never been consistent with regard to what somebody, maybe even you, mentioned a minute ago of how different principals use it in different ways. And kids aren't stupid. They know. And I've talked to many of them. They'll say, well, I'm suspended for 3 days because I did such and such. And another kid over here will say, really? Well, I got suspended for a month or 10 days. So it's just all different. And kids know it. Tolerant of the intolerant. That's where we are as a society, and that's what's happening in our schools. So go ahead, Justin. Push back.
Made me forget what I was going to say. Y'all can keep going. I can't remember, sorry.
So I met with each school and specifically asked them what their budgetary needs for discipline would be. All 3 elementary schools gave the same exact answer, and I'm going to mirror what Joe said. They talked about in all 3 cases, Harrison, Snow Hill, and Wallace Smith, that one individual was completely disrupting the culture of not just one class, but usually a couple classes. Because with the practice that they had, if that student was misbehaving or that in one, then they would have to oftentimes place them in another class, in another grade level, to get him away from his peers, which I couldn't believe that was going on. But all of them said they needed the same thing. The first thing they needed was fewer steps to get them a part of the bridge program, which I hadn't heard of the bridge program. So then I met with Miss Russell to have her kind of go over that with me. So right now, all three of those schools are sharing the same facility over at Udoy Elementary. So there's Udoy Elementary, Harrison Elementary, Snow Hill Elementary, and Wallace Smith, all using the same facility. So one need might be to get that to be fewer schools sharing one facility. They also said that they would love, and this is elementary, I'm going to move my way up, and I'm going to finish talking about the adult high school, which was a passion of mine.
And very successful, by the way.
Thank you, Joe.
It's,
And they said that they needed at least one of two things besides the bridge. And they said one of their concerns about the bridge was the number of documented episodes, 40. 40 episodes, they said one young man it took before they could get him to be put into the bridge. And I mean so I don't understand the bridge completely yet, but I'm getting there. But anyway, so they need either an ISS monitor, and they'd be happy to share that between two schools, where one of them gets it Monday, Wednesday, Friday one week, and Tuesday, Thursday the next. Or they said every single school that I talked to, Central, not Harrison Bay, Central, Brown, and the three elementaries, they all needed inclusion teachers. And they needed these inclusion teachers not because of the numbers, but because they have a couple extreme students that are marked as inclusion, but would have been years ago marked as behaviorally disordered. So they almost need an educational assistant to be with them to kind of keep them in line. The other thing that the upper levels asked for, and I will share a concern that, I knew it was on its way. It's hitting this country. I've been to 3 funerals in the last 3 months of ex-students of mine that either played for me or were friends with my children. And they all died of fentanyl. And right now, fentanyl has made it into vaping. And there's also a fentanyl candy out there now, which has the SROs very concerned. But marijuana gummies has become very popular and is being sold what might be considered legally or not legally, I don't know yet, across the counter in certain areas. But right now, the vaping is the one that the middle schools and the high schools had their biggest concern, because they said it didn't have enough teeth into what's, for first offenses and stuff. And they're not sure if they don't have a SRO, they don't have the kits to check the vaping to see if it's something other than just vape and not something more serious. So they were asking, and I guess from what the SRO that I talked to told me, they're roughly about $28 to $35 a kit. They get them free with the sheriff's department, but if they're an SO, not an SRO, then the school's responsible for buying those kits. So as far as most of the main concerns, the one that the high schools had was, their concern is, and it's been there as long as I can remember. I didn't have to use Washington School very often, but when I did, I remember it was almost like you had to get a calendar and figure out how you could get a couple students in. And I remember right at the end of my administrative career, to use Washington School, you had a certain number of spots, and you couldn't go over those spots. And if you did need to go over those spots, you had to kind of talk to another administrator to borrow one of theirs, and you had to kind of work out a thing. And that's, that part of it, it's, I know Washington School has changed some, just like the adult high school has changed, but the concern of the high schools especially was that certain level of discipline has students coming back after a quarter or after a semester when they really would like them out of the school for the whole year. You know, that doesn't mean they don't have to be educated. They just don't want them back in their building disrupting again. So I shared with them that I would bring this out. The last thing, one of the biggest mistakes, and again, you know, I had discussions, and what's funny, I will tell you this. We used to do something for the adult high school. We always provided a holiday meal for the kids. Turkey, ham, everything. And Rhonda always contributed to it, so I appreciate that. It was free to them. The adult high school, dropping it and making it what's called the Graduation Success Program was a mistake. That's just my opinion. I'm going to share my opinion. Dropping the adult high school and replacing it with the Graduation Success Program. The students that come to the Graduation Success Program need more one-on-one or more teacher time than what this program can allow. The adult high school met a community responsibility. It met the need of many communities by keeping kids in school. And yes, I agree with Rhonda. If they are 19 years old, that's where we came in when it was the adult high school. And never had an SRO. I was principal at that adult high school for 15 years and never had a police officer there, and had gangs from 2 and 3 different communities going to school there. But they knew it was their last chance, so they knew, and we didn't follow the same rules and guidelines because it was an adult high school. They knew if they got in trouble, they were done. We often gave them a second chance and let them do it online at home, and many of them were okay, you know, and successful with that. But as we sold the adult high school back in 2004, the board meeting right before that, the comparison that I gave, and if you don't know where it came from San Antonio, Texas. They were the first ones to really open it up. I was a part of the PEF Leadership Fellows, and we had to do a project. And that was my project, the adult high school. So 3 times, if I'm not mistaken, I presented the adult high school to the school board. Not always in person, but with documents. The area that it helped, the 2 most important areas, it was proven that if you have an alternative education for that particular age group, your prison system has fewer participants. And then the second thing, your welfare system has fewer participants. So that's where the adult high school was brought in, and I think should be considered to do it again. It's right now, when I visited the Graduation Success Program a month and a half ago, I think Miss Young maybe is now, had come back out of retirement, Martell Young. Am I wrong?
She's at Washington, but she's not.
Okay, but, so is it still Renee Lynn that's, okay. So, you know, they've got a few teachers involved there, but it's not the same as having the kids in class in front of a teacher instead of always in front of the computer, and a teacher sitting with them in front of the computer trying to talk them through the problems, especially math-wise and science. But again, I think, you know, if we had an alternative education program for even the 18-year-olds that are not on pace to graduate, but for sure the 19-year-olds that, you know, need to do it. So, again, those were the budgetary, disciplinary concerns that my district had. Thank you.
Thanks, Gary. I heard some of the same feedback about the bridge classrooms, and really for students who were really, really struggling, and this is one student in a school, or like the very edge of really needing a lot of help, but not qualifying for an alternative placement yet. Still needing to be in the school, that there was a need for these inclusion teachers, for someone to be with that child to help them regulate so that they can continue participating in learning in their school environment, because they haven't qualified for the bridge program or Dawn School or any sort of alternative placement, but really needing a lot more help regulating behaviorally. I got some of the same feedback.
What
as
is
well.
the difference between the bridge program and Dawn School? Is that the bridge is before you go to Dawn? What exactly?
Bridge is an elementary program that's essentially an alternative setting for students. And again, we talked through this. I'll kind of let Dr. Stewart talk through some of the options that we're talking about, but it's for elementary. Of course,
Yeah.
Dawn can take some younger students, but it goes all the way up, and it's, directly related to students with disabilities. So the bridge, there are some programs, there's some classrooms that are specific to students with disabilities, but then there are also classrooms that can take any kid that's just struggling, with how to interact with other students in elementary. I don't want to jump ahead. We in terms of thinking about budget and what we need to do, and again, what resources we need to offer, we're putting some plans in place to up not only the options at secondary, but also the options at elementary, including increasing the number of those bridge seats.
How many are there now?
There's 6 bridge seats per learning community, so there's 30. And it's
30 for the whole
district, and it's a 45-day placement. So just to give you a shift, and I'll go back and then go forward, but so we're talking about increasing the number of bridge classrooms in each learning community and increasing the number of seats in the classroom, and then also creating some systems where a child who's moved to bridge has to demonstrate some success in bridge before transitioning back, and building stronger transition supports back.
So it's not a hard
so
45
it's not-
days.
Yeah, and it could be either
Okay.
way. It could be
Okay.
20 days because the
Sure.
kid is demonstrating what they need and they're ready to go back, or it could be longer. The real challenge here is that bridge is in lieu of expulsion at the elementary level. That's really what it's functioning at. And the challenge with Dawn, the reason why it's so hard to seat an elementary school child at Dawn is because typically those kids end up there for their entire continuum. Once they're there, often they never leave. And so it really should be we should have exhausted all of our supports before making that specific determination. And so bridge, the exceptional ed bridge, is something that's in lieu of those things, for that very reason.
It's very, very hard. You only got 5 seats per learning community.
6, but yeah.
And it's what some of my principals tell me is that it's just very, very, very,
Yeah.
very, very,
Yep.
very, very hard
We're changing some of that
to get a
process as
student
well.
there.
Well, what we don't want to do is we don't want to, we do expect, it really goes to the way this is laid out, we really do expect schools to say, Sonia's having some problems, let's build a plan for Sonia, and let's execute on her plan, and check it regularly and see how it's doing. And that is part of what we want them to do, to be able to say, a plan that works or you put in place for a kid, if it's not working, let's change it and try again, and keep assessing and seeing if there's a way to help them be successful in the space. So that's some of that challenge of the time that you guys are talking about. But one of the things we are talking about, and we will do, is that right now, we think there's too much gatekeeping in a single space. It needs to be more of a collaborative decision, and we're going to do that. I think the threat to the expansion, though, is we go from 6 to now 16 in every learning community. It's very easy for us to be here in a year asking for 32. And that's where we have to continue on the front end to say, it really is our job to continue to create these environments, build these supports, assess our supportive plans, so on and so forth. But we are extending the seats, and we're changing sort of the criteria for getting on or making a more collaborative decision.
So it could take, if I'm gonna have that plan, and it's not working, so I'm gonna change it, and it's not working, I'm gonna change it. Well, during that period of time that you're making tweaks and you're changing, and we're still disrupting the whole school.
Yeah, and that's part, I mean, to your point and to Sonia's point about like sometimes the gate's been too tight, that's what we're looking at the process of how do we make it more user-friendly. But again, to be clear, we don't want to make it so easy that it just ends up being a floodgate of kids
I
that
get
don't
that,
go in
but
there.
I think that it's sometimes that we spend so much time, energy, money, discussion, whatever, on meeting the needs of those kids that have real needs, that the normal kids are getting ignored. I think that's happening some.
I do want to add that one of the things that we're talking with the principals about just this week is essentially allowing them to establish, we're calling it a connect classroom, but it'll have it, and it stays in the school, where it can be used much more flexibly. A child could be placed in there for a certain period of time with their teacher coming in for supports, with seed supports coming in different places, where they don't have to leave necessarily the building. So you could have, it's kind of like in lieu of classroom to bridge, maybe there's something even in between that schools can do. With the flexibility that's coming from the staffing model, we feel like that's a real option for them to do. And at the secondary space, it comes in, it's the same kind of thing where we bring in some of our kids that in lieu of expulsion, they come to school from 2 to 6:30, right, and have the same sort of experience. It's outside of the school day. And so schools are gonna have some of that opportunity, and I think that's important. I know there's lots of principals who would rather keep them there with a different system than send them out of their school, because especially if they're coming back to them and they have to transition back in.
I think all these options are things that people would be willing to do, and it would help. I mean, when you're hearing from teachers saying kids tearing up the classroom and we don't have anywhere for them to go, these will help. They'll give options. It's more of a continuum of supports. It's a lot of money. Like, I mean, we've talked to a couple of you about where it is and what it's going to take. It's going to take a large investment to do this, and it's not all. I mean, some of the things that y'all seen, some things we're talking about aren't just about this. It's more, you've heard us say, we've heard from teachers, I know you've heard from teachers, that we need to resource schools differently. I mean, that's what we're looking at, and as we resource schools differently, it opens up options for a Connect Academy, at school A, B, or C.
So under this new model, the principal will have the autonomy to be able, and I like that.
They've got to have the autonomy, but again, if they don't have the resources, it
Right.
doesn't matter if they
That's what
have
I
the
was getting ready
autonomy.
to
I
say.
mean,
If they don't have the
yeah.
funds to do it.
yeah.
We're hoping to give them sort of some ideas on what these can look like. So a Connect Academy could look this way and kind of get them brainstorming. And our principals they're good at this, right? They're going to come
I
up.
hope that they'll
gonna
include
come up with some
their
stuff.
teachers
They
or
will.
staffs
Yeah.
on
Yeah.
on their building level
Yeah.
in some of those conversations, because they're the boots on the ground. They're the ones that know what the issues are. But I've talked to a lot of teachers out of my district that are saying, Mr. Joe, I'm not coming back next year. I'm going to find me another job. I've had a lot of teachers tell me that. Well, why are you leaving? And it ain't about money. I mean, money's 3 or 4 down the list. Number 1 is student behavior, and then number 2 is feeling the lack of support. Whether it's really a lack of support or a perception of a lack of support, I don't know. But that's what scares me, is that we're just going to lose some really good educators if we don't get this under control.
One thing that nobody's mentioned so far is cell phones. Do what? Oh,
Yeah.
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I was gonna call her.
I thought you were
She-
pointing. I'm sorry.
she
You
waved
pointed
at
me.
me,
I thought,
sorry.
okay.
Miss Jones?
So, I mean, we all understand that there are children that have, situations and that take us to where we need to do, connected classrooms, the bridges, the SSPs. I mean, we know that those things are in place. However, and I'm probably, I'm sorry, I just gotta say, we also know that there are children that are obstinate, defiant, bullies, unruly, disrespectful, for no other reason than just, I mean, I shouldn't say for no other reason, but, I mean, I had them in school with me, y'all had them in school with y'all. I mean, there are some kids that are just, I don't like to call children bad, but they exhibit bad behavior, okay? And for those children that do that, I personally, from being in this position for now 8.5 years, doing what I do, what I've done for the last 15 years, I mean, I know that is the case. I mean, I have kids in my family that are just bad. They're just bad. Sorry, I hate to say it. They're just bad. At what point, I mean, how do we figure that piece out? And I know, I jokingly have been saying this for about a year now with my peers or my family and my husband. They're like, you know, people just got too many rights. It's just too many rights, too many rights. People got too many rights. Kids got too many rights. Adults have too many rights. When I was in school, I'm going back to school. Everybody loves a CS school. Everybody loves a CS school. I went to CSAS from 2nd to 12th grade. 10th grade. I'll never forget it. And what I'm about to say, they probably can't do now, and who at this point can't do nothing to the people that was there because they retired. But when I was in the 10th grade, and I'm an adult, and my parents permitted it. But when I was in the 10th grade, I can name you 3 working, very well-known professional individuals in this community right now. One of them is myself. We got in trouble. Not for being in a food fight, because there was a food fight at CSAS. And I have to give this example to tell why I'm about to say this. But not because we were in the food fight. We got in trouble because we was eating our food while the fight was going on, but everybody had to sign a paper. Like when Miss Rena Walton came, she's still at Arts and Sciences, she's our guys, when she came and said, all y'all was at this table, I need everybody to sign the paper and line up, you going to the office. And me and 2 other peers was like, I ain't signing that paper, I was eating my food. If I signed this paper, that means I was in a food fight. I was not in a food fight. Food fight was behavior 1 wrong, right? But then we was mouthing off. That was behavior 2. We got sent to the prison. The kids that was in the food fight got in trouble for whatever their punishment was. I know for a fact that I did 3 days of ISS at Arts and Sciences. It wasn't sitting in a classroom listening to nobody teach me. It wasn't sitting in the classroom where I could say, I don't want to do this, whatever, call my mama, it wasn't none of that. Y'all know how they do. Yoking their necks and grabbing there and talking back. I didn't get to do none of that. You know what my 3 days of ISS was? Y'all know what my 3 days of ISS was?
Cleaning the school.
I cleaned Arts and Sciences. I put on a hairnet. I wore clothes that my mama didn't mind me probably getting Clorox on when I took them trays when my friends walked by me and made fun of me because I was cleaning in the kitchen with Miss Allison and her crew. Or sweeping in the disarray wells with Mr. Olin and Miss Diane and Mr. Hester, who I still see to this day. Those were probably the worst 3 days of my life, but I tell you what. I knew after that 3rd day that I was going to pick and choose how I responded, even if what I was doing was based on what my parents had taught me. And my mama and daddy said, yes, we taught her not to sign things because they're legal documents. If she's being punished for the way she did it and for being, then we all understand. We're not going to accept the punishment for her agreeing not to sign a document. But she was disrespectful, okay. And they looked me in my face and said, you were disrespectful, this is your punishment. And I did that punishment. And it didn't kill me. But what it did do was tell me, it taught me a couple things. 1, I better be going to college or somewhere, God, I don't want to do this every day. Because my peers are nasty. 2, there's an accountability for what I do no matter what I do. And 3, my mama and daddy are going to hold me accountable just as what I like to say at that time, and I still call him that, my school dad, Mr. Bill Kennedy, was holding me accountable. I didn't get to tell Mr. Kennedy, oh, I can't wait till my mama get up and she going to cuss you out. I wish I had said that. My mom probably would have knocked my teeth down my throat when she got to the school. And so I'm saying all that to say that oftentimes, now, once again, if y'all came and said that today, oh my God, this room will fill up and oh, you can't do that, oh my gosh. but it didn't kill me. It didn't. And I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you, I don't think that ISS sitting in the classroom listening to somebody teach you is effective. Because half of the time they cussing the teachers back out. Or they're getting up and walking out. We have got to figure out, and I hear this from so many people, and I feel like this in my world some days. We have got to figure out what is the line. Like, where is the line in the sand? And at what point is it just an accountability piece? And I'm saying that not to you all, because it will be a matter of us being able to support you in whatever you came back and said. But we have got to figure out as a governing board for the school system, what is the line in the sand? Because some of these children are coming from homes where that's okay. Now keep in mind, I just told you I wouldn't have been allowed to do that. But in some homes, that's allowed.
Yeah.
I've seen it.
Yeah.
I've seen it. Like, I've had a mom tell me in my face with a senior from a high school, I told her to lay hands on her. She told me that, me and the principal, in front of the other child, mom and daddy, she told her daughter to lay hands, which fight the other girl. And I said, as the school board member standing there that day, for the principal, if she touches her, she won't graduate in 2 weeks. I promise you. If she touches her, she won't. I'll make sure that the people administration at the district knows that you just told her to fight her. So when it comes up, nobody did her wrong. You told her to fight her. I heard it with my own ears and I got witnesses. So I think there has to be a level of accountability. Our kids can't have basketball games for adult and children problems. Just being honest. We have got to figure out, y'all, as peers, what are we gonna do? Because I don't know. My baby finna go to pre-K next year. I'm scared. I'm really concerned. Now he going to the Hamilton County School, we can get him in one, because it is income eligible. Just putting that out there. He will be going to. But I am concerned because it's getting younger and younger. So we have to figure this out. Now, like I said, I know that there are plans, y'all, and I get it. I know there's a population of children that need that.
Mm-hmm.
But we all know that there's a population of kids that's just unruly. And it ain't, we gotta figure out an accountability piece for that with the parent. Like, we gotta figure that piece out. Like, we have to figure out at what point is the parent accountable for this? At what point? I mean, we recently had an incident. At what point is enough when you bucking principles? When you trying to fight, when you'll fight your principal. At what point is enough? And that kid might have had every kind of plan. But at what point is that enough? And it is affecting us. And I don't think we're ever going to get academics right. I'm just being honest. I really don't think we're ever going to get academics right if we do not get this discipline right. And it's not to be singling kids out. It's just, and you know your kid.
Yeah. So, correct me if I'm wrong, because I was reading through this. That there's the individual plan comes in at tier 3.
It
For,
can,
like-
but not necessarily. There also
Okay.
is, after a 5-day suspension, you have to have a behavior plan.
Okay. I've got a lot of things kind of going around in my head. I have heard a lot of the needs for more seats in Bridge. And I don't want to be one of those folks that says, like, what's the most cost-efficient way to do this? Because ultimately we have to do what's best for kids. I agree with you. I think that it's probably more expensive to put the resources in every single school building so that principals can use some sort of like flex and therapeutic model to address kids in their school building. I think there's much more consistency and there's more accountability around the academics than when you send a kid completely out of your school building to a Bridge classroom. Because I'm interested in, is there a cohesive curriculum or set of supports that happens in Bridge, or is it just 45 days somewhere else to give the teacher a break, and then they come back and they haven't received like the behavioral stuff that they need, or the therapy that they need, or whatever was going on with that kid, it's definitely the more expensive thing to do to put one of those spaces in every single school building. But I think it's the most efficient way to serve the needs of the kids academically and behaviorally, because you're not disrupting, like, they still have the people around them that they need, and there's more accountability with the academics. There's more I guess communication between the classroom teacher that they're going to be coming back to.
So, I mean, I agree. I mean, to my point about hopefully in a year, we're not asking for more seats.
Sure.
Hopefully in a year, we're saying we use the bridge classrooms less because schools were able to build these connect classrooms in ways that really made a difference in their building. And that's where I'm hoping we are, that there's some flexibility there, and that when they're able to keep them more, I mean, we're hopeful that they'll make some of these choices for the resources that we're rolling out
Sure.
towards them, and they'll be able to staff some of these spaces. I think we are in a year of exploration. I think
Yeah.
once they start to see it, they're going to start to imagine together. And
When will they
really-
find out what their allocation is going to be?
Wednesday PM. They won't get it at the principals meeting. We're going to let them lead the principals meeting. They'll be emailed it, but Wednesday evening they're going to get their allocations. And there's basically 5 weeks, 6 weeks of them collaborating with their comm soups, getting other information from different places, building their teams, talking to their teachers, talking to their parents, and then making some decisions. They're going to get some of these alternative models that we're talking about around discipline. They're going to get those on Wednesday. I'm leading a session where I say, here's some ideas. Essentially, this costs a resource. This doesn't. This happens in your building. This is outside of your building, and so that they're going to start to kind of imagine what some of those spaces could be in their building. To your question about curriculum, there is a curriculum with Bridge, and it's both academic and some of those social supports. But in a Bridge classroom, you can have kids 1st to 5th grade. It's really wonky.
Yeah, it's
And so in a
that's-
school-based space, you
Yeah.
could change that. You could say, we're doing 1st through 3rd in the mornings, and we're doing, they're gonna have a little bit more ability to be flexible. They can push that classroom teacher in, even if it's just for a high five. I saw you got that done today, so proud of you, can't wait to have you back. I think there's a lot of opportunities there. I think it's just kind of positioning our principals to reimagine what this could look like. And I do think that with the resources that we're pushing towards the schools, they could make some of these choices.
Sure. Is there, one more question. Is there, the second layer of that, is there a need for a therapeutic location for the elementary age level? To where there is not necessarily a Washington, but a space where kids can receive really intensive therapy for the handful of kids, the 1 or 2 kids in each building that really cannot function.
We have a therapist that 90% of his time is spent with bridge kids right now.
Okay.
So I'll be honest, it's not enough time. You know what I mean? Even with those 30 kids, we probably could use 3 of him, but we do have a full-time therapist that works almost entirely with bridge kids
Okay.
right now. That's on staff.
So one therapist for 30 kids.
Costs money. Yes.
30,
Yeah.
30 difficult kids.
Yeah.
But it's
Very
intensive-
high
it's
needs,
intensive support.
intensive
Yeah,
kids.
That's a
Yeah,
heck
and
of a
so this is,
caseload.
sure, it is.
I just want to know, are the principals empowered? Because we have wonderful policies in place for behavior and discipline. Are they empowered? And are their raises affected by the number of students that are sent to their office?
Yeah. No, there's nothing in.
There's
a
nothing
raise or
associated with
salary
that.
That's
I've had
attached to any of that.
retired teacher
Um,
tell me that.
No,
that
ma'am,
It could just be, hey, he or she wanted a free afternoon.
Yeah.
But to Carissa's, like she said, every home is so different, and every home allows different, acceptability in behavior. But how well do we allow that when the children get in trouble? Are the parents or guardian is it made clear to them that what they do at your house, you have your rules? These are the rules that we have, and we must demand that your child adheres to these rules. Because when these kids go out in the real world, if they choose to have a job, they can't act this way in the real world.
Yeah, I mean, we, in conferences with parents, we obviously discuss that. I think it's really important for us to consider, like, these are our kids, regardless of where they're coming from. You know, I mean, y'all have heard me talk about it. I was lucky enough to have two parents, and one of them happened to be a Marine that knew how to handle me, right? And not everybody has that. And so as we talk about these things, I struggle because I lean on the same way. I mean, when I was a principal, it's probably some people would say he's too heavy-handed, or maybe some would say he's too soft, but there's so many different factors that kids are bringing in to our schools. And I'm not saying that we're making excuses for any of them, but we also want to support them in a way that gives them an opportunity so that when they do graduate, hopefully they do enter, the real world. So I think it's important for us to consider that as we continue this conversation. To your question about, I said at the beginning, I think we've got a consistency issue. I don't think it's the code's fault that we're going through these things. We talk about it a lot, like in any implementation: quality, fidelity, intensity, and consistency. If you get off with any of those, you're going to have variation, and that's what we've got right now. I remembered what I was going to say earlier to you, Joe. What I hope that this board does and will help us with, though, is that when you hear these conversations, many of these are community issues, right? These are issues that are not. They're not starting in the school. They're starting somewhere else in the community and then finding their way and manifesting themselves in the school. And so I think elevating this conversation to talk about what role does our community play in it, whether that's the role that parents play, the role that organizations, the housing authority, sheriffs, all these groups play a part in where we are. And so I think bringing that into the conversation is important as well.
I have a question.
Sure.
So Mr. King was talking about the adult high school, and I remember the adult high school, but he was talking about the adult high school. And I know that they allowed them to complete, correct me if I'm wrong, but they completed their diplomas there.
Your credits, yeah.
Their credits to get their diplomas. I remember they had graduations at like Bayside.
Yeah.
Winter, December graduation was Bayside, and May
Okay.
graduation was the Tivoli.
Typically, right. So they had regular graduation. Thinking a little, like fast forward to now, thinking about that concept, is that something that we could reconsider? And other people do it, so I'm gonna say it. So Mayor Wong is talking about a high school downtown, a career high school downtown, right? A technical situation of some sorts. I don't know what it all entails, but I mean, is there opportunity to have a discussion? Because I don't feel like we've really been, if I'm misspeaking, tell me. I don't feel like we as a board have really been a part of that conversation. So considering what's going on, is there maybe possibility to have an opportunity to have a conversation with him, like about maybe marrying the two, like maybe making that a high school, an adult high school where people can go and learn trades to go out into the world once they get their what I'm trying to say?
Certifications.
Diplomas and certifications, then they've been put on the track. What we've done, I feel like our due diligence at that point, even with the 19 or 20-year-old, to say, we can let you recover your credits, because that's what you wanted to do. We put you on, you've gotten your cosmetology license, or you gotten your coding certification, or you gotten your CNA, or MA now is a big thing, medical assistant certification, or whatever. This is what you need to go out into Hamilton County and be successful, do whatever you want to do. Maybe that's something to maybe present to him to maybe kind of, I don't want to say kill two birds with one stone. I feel like my grandma when I say that, but kill two birds with one stone, because you are able to allow individuals who may be disrupting for whatever reason, like Rhonda and Gary and Joe are talking about, because of their age or whatever. But then they may also just desire, I mean, like, remember was it Job Corps? Is that the thing? Was that right? So there was Job Corps back in the day when I was in school, a lot of things. So maybe looking and making that school one of those places where it's, I don't want to say, well, a one-stop shop. Maybe you want to do Job Corps if you're 16 and you don't want to go back to school. You might do our version of Job Corps. I don't know, being innovative, but thinking about that. Because yes, we probably do need a new high school down here. But in hindsight, we have these needs that maybe need to be addressed too, that would honestly free space in some of our other schools where there may be some overcrowding and other issues. I don't know. I'm just trying to think outside of the box.
I
I
mean,
haven't
I
really
think
heard
we
a
were-
lot about that concept of what that school would be, but just thinking about what we could do there.
Whether it's downtown, I mean, we're just
Or
kind of
wherever.
looking at options and talking about what that might look like. You know, I've got obviously a little bit more understanding of Dalton High School and what it was. You know, one of the things that I feel strongly about is that the students need to stay connected to their regular school, where the adult high school, a kid transferred out of Red Bank and would be a student enrolled at the adult high school, where I think they need to stay connected at Red Bank, go to another location that does the same thing as the adult high school. It's just a matter of finding that location and then staffing it. Wasn't a ton of staff, but it was, I think, 8 or 9 teachers,
Yes.
something like that.
2
So,
English, 2 math, 1 science, 1 social studies.
Yeah, I'm open. I'm just trying to think of something out of the box because clearly we know there's a need.
Can I do want to just continue to put on the table, though, that, you know, to some extent, we as a society have done this before, and when we've sorted children, certain kids get sorted into certain spaces, and others get invited into others, and it is our job to ensure that every single kid has access to that high-quality opportunity. And so I just want to caution us as we start to think about these alternative spaces, and I think it's a good conversation for us to be having, but we do have to have guardrails for ourselves, because we do know, you know, that 30, 40, 50 years ago, there were certain kids that got certain opportunities and others that didn't get the same.
Right.
And I think we want to be
Right.
really clear-eyed and diligent and wise about how we do those things, because it's important.
I gotta say this. Go ahead, Joe. Go ahead.
Go ahead, are you responding to
I
what
want,
she's
yeah, I
saying?
want to speak to
Yeah,
that.
go ahead.
I agree with you, but if you got a certain number of kids that are disrupting it for another child, then
I hear what you're saying. You want to make sure that a small group of children don't take from a larger group of children.
that's right.
And I
That's right.
hear that. At the same time, I would contend that in some ways our schools haven't been best designed for all kids. And I'll just use my kids as an example. I have 3 girls and a boy. Which child had the hardest time in school? My son. Schools aren't actually made as well for boys. Girls do better in school because they don't need to be as active. They're a little more willing to be compliant, so on and so forth. That's qualitative in my house, but it's also research would say that our schools are better. I mean, we were at the top 10, what was it, the top 10 graduates, we were all there in
Superintendents,
the
yeah.
spring, the superintendent's thing, and if you guys, I was just ticking off the number of boys versus the number of girls.
I've been doing that for years. It's been going down, 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 and a lot of that is our fault. We've made the adult male, we have made the white male the boogeyman in the room.
Well, I would go with males.
And we've done that in schools. I mean, I'm glad that girls are the most valedictorians and all that kind, but it really bothers me that we don't have the boys. That we need strong male leadership in this country, and it's very lacking. And that's one of the things we're seeing wrong in the school system, in my opinion, as well.
But I mean, Jody, the point you're making, though, I think that's our job as educators. How do we create environments where our boys are equally successful?
That's why
as
Macaulay's so
our girls?
successful.
You know, and that's
Educate
what I
boys.
mean. It's not. I'm not talking about leaving kids that are having a hard time not being disruptive in a room. I'm saying we do need to think about how we set up our schools so that every child can have success. And I use that gender example because I've just seen it play out in our house, and I think you can see it play out, you know, nationally. So, Mr. Wingate.
I was just gonna say, I've listened to all of you. I've been kind of jotting notes, my thoughts around this. I could talk literally for hours about this. This is something I'm very passionate about, and I fully know that most people don't really see it the way I see it, so I'm okay with that. But there are a lot of disconnects when we talk about the culture that currently exists. And I don't necessarily like to, when we frame the discussion, say the culture that currently exists in our schools, because what exists in our school buildings is what is existing in our culture, period. And so what you see right now, and there's always been an element to it. It's just it's now it seems to just be more prevalent. Maybe it's just because we have so much more access to information, so we're more aware than we've ever been before. But we live in a culture that is resistant to discipline. It just is. We could all talk about areas in our lives where we're resistant to do what we ought to do or what we need to do. We don't want to do that. And I think the conversations that I've had with employees here in the system at times is that, as we've already noted, we could go around this room right now and spend the next 5 hours, and you would get as many people as are in this room. You're probably not going to have more than a couple on the same page when it comes to discipline. I mean, you're just not. I mean, I'm in social groups with people, ball fields, church, wherever, that I see the way their kids behave or the way that they interact with their kids, and that's not how I'm going to interact with mine. And it doesn't make them bad people. It just helps me to understand, as an educator dealing with human nature every day, that there are people walking in the building every day that they're not on the same page that I'm on. They're just not. Now, that doesn't make it okay, because if I'm teaching in a building, I got to work there every day. So the culture, it's one of the things I loved about being a teacher was I was given my standards, given my expectations from administration. But when I shut the door, I was king of the kingdom. And the culture in that room for the next 7.5 hours was going to be what I wanted it to be. And I had the opportunity to do that. Now, I also knew that I had some support. Now, I didn't have unconditional support. And here's where some of the disconnects are, Jill, where I see disconnects in school systems, not this one, but all over the place. So you've got teachers who are trained and licensed professionals in content, and they're trained and licensed professionals in best practices when it comes to instruction. And the limited bit of classroom management training that they get, typically in the last decade to decade and a half, has been focused squarely on academic rigor, raising the challenging curriculum, and then trying to teach to as many learning styles as you can. And that philosophy has permeated education, that if we do that, that limits a lot of your problems. And anybody that's been in a classroom knows that obviously a well-planned lesson goes a long way. But you're going to have any number of students walk into your room every day. It doesn't matter how good the lesson is. They're not there for the lesson. They're not there to comply. And they have a hard time functioning in that structure. They just do. And one of the things I've communicated to teachers and administrators a little bit in the past 3 years is that teachers need to know that an administrator supports them. But they also need to know that that administrator is going to have an expectation that when you either fill out that referral or you pick up the phone and call me, and if you pick up the phone and call me, it probably needs to have bypassed any other attempt you've made, right? I'm going to ask you, what steps have you taken to address this behavior as an administrator? And I want to hear that. And it doesn't have to be what this 6th grade English teacher is doing, doesn't have to be the same as what the 8th grade science teacher is, as long as it's consistent every day with every kid. And then when they explain to me, here was the undesired behavior, here's how I addressed it the first time, the second time, however many times, whatever that process is, I'm not able to make any progress, then as an administrator now, it's my job to take over. We don't have that process very much. Now, there are places in this county where people do it well. There are. And when they do it well, they're knocking it out of the park. But there are plenty of places where there is a disconnect. There's dysfunction there. You have teachers that either don't want to put the effort into discipline, don't know how to discipline, or they really want to do it and they need some guidance. And then you have administrators who haven't communicated that on the front end what the expectation is. And so you've got frustrated teachers and principals. You got teachers frustrated, can't seem to get a handle on class. You got administrators frustrated because they got the same teachers always picking up the phone and calling them, expecting them to drop whatever they're doing to come down and take care of a problem that either the teacher should have taken care of or a process should have taken care of. And it just doesn't happen. I will push back on some of what's been said a little bit in saying that it's a complicated issue and it's complex. I don't think it's complex. I think it's hard. I think it's hard. I think it's hard work. It requires effort, consistent effort every day. But it's not rocket science. It's just not. Here are the expectations. When you don't meet those expectations, here is going to be the reaction from the teacher, from the administration, whatever. Here's the response. And at some level, you can phrase it however you want to phrase it. There are a number of kids and families in our community that walk into our schools every day that we don't have their attention. And when they walk in the building, they don't know that A, somebody is in charge, B, they don't know who it is that's in charge. And we just don't have their attention. And we've got to find a way to do that. And there are a number of ways to do it, but we've got to put the effort in to do that. And that's where I struggle. Rhonda, I will tell you, you mentioned earlier, you're talking about not, if that was coming down from wherever, if it was coming from the district level or whatever. My opinion, where it comes from is, because everything is so test score driven now, and this is not every administrator, it's not. But too many educators or administrators across the country are too worried about putting good test scores down on, or too data down for a couple of years, so that it makes them attractive and desirable for whatever the next job is.
I think you're right.
And so as opposed to understanding where my feet are in this space and to try to create culture, which, when I do that, academics are going to go up.
That's right.
As opposed to focusing backwardly and always pressing on teachers to raise academic rigor and to meet learning styles. Because if we don't have good culture, we don't have good structure and order, it doesn't matter how good the lesson is. And I just think that's where a lot of that comes from. And again, it's not complicated, it's not rocket science, but it is. It's very hard work. It's one of the reasons why I greatly appreciate the job I have now as opposed to the one I did trying to teach biology for 8 years. It's tough. Freshmen come in every day, and most of them had no desire to learn about photosynthesis or animal and plant cells, and the cell, they just didn't. And my job every day was to grab as many of them as I could around the collar, drag them through the mud, and hope something was sticking because
Not
we got,
physically
yeah,
doing it.
we got but we got a test coming at the end of the term, right? And their scores are going to be, I'm going to be evaluated on their scores. And on top of that, and this is going to sound terrible, but it's just, I had to keep my thumb on them too, And again, I'm thankful I'm at a place right now when I start talking, people start writing, Doesn't always happen that way in a middle school classroom. So.
We've got about 11 more minutes.
We don't have enough time.
Obviously, this is going to be the first of a few meetings. I appreciate your words. I did get some I have gotten a lot of feedback in the community, talking to teachers, knocking doors, having conversations. And I feel like that classroom management piece and the teacher mentoring piece is a place where we can make some investment and keep some of those teachers that leave in those first 5 years. For sure. I think it can play a big role in teacher retention, but I also know in my own household with my own kids, when a discipline issue arises, I'm a much better parent when I'm rested or supported or I've been taken care of.
Not stressed.
And I'm a less excellent parent when I am completely frazzled. And I feel like a lot of our staff is the latter. And I think it's this self-fulfilling, like it's this cycle spiral downward. The teachers don't feel supported. They feel stressed out. They're stretched thin. And then the classroom management piece isn't going well. And can investing in some teacher support also be part of this recommendation that we make from the disciplinary committee?
Well, I mean, just to remind board, we've invested heavily in the first 3 years of any new teacher that comes to us, and actually have some really good retention data around those
Good.
first 3 years. I would take it a step further and echo like what Joe is talking about is steps we're trying to make towards personalization.
Right.
So that we're supporting kids well and supporting teachers well. We'll also go this, sometimes as educators, we don't even see in the mirror what we need.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying this for new teachers or new principals. I'm talking about those of us that have been around for a while. Sometimes we think that we're good at classroom management, or we think that we're good at setting up tier 1 supports and being consistent, and that we don't need retraining. Is a system we need to invest in training. I mean, I wrote it down. Understanding is something that you said at the very beginning, but sometimes we think we understand it all.
Right.
And as a district, we don't. We've got to invest in the training and the time to sit down and really dig into what we mean by personalization and what we mean by setting up good systems and structures, routines and procedures, and get back to square one so that we can have good test scores. And so she was like, "Are you going to say something?" I was like, "I can't say any better than Joe just said it. I wouldn't need to put my stamp on it."
Yeah. Mr. King?
Excuse me.
One,
Oh, I'm sorry.
one thing to keep in mind too, just so it's clear, discipline is teaching.
Yeah.
The punishments come after that. And I hope that, parents and especially teachers realize that when they're referring to the discipline, there's a process that you do with that student before it ever gets to the administration. And I can reflect back. So used to have a referral slip when it was the adult high school about what steps they had done, which later on came with the most recent, which I was glad to see. What have you already done with this student? But something that we had there was, what's your recommendation for this student for this action? And when it was the adult high school, they had gotten to that point where they had already been through the teaching process with that student a couple times before they sent them to me. And then I looked at what the recommendation was and stuff. But I think sometimes we lose the idea that discipline is the teaching of appropriate behavior. Mm-hmm. And then the
The root
punishments
word
that
is
come
disciple.
yeah, so we just need to remember, and sometimes teachers say they don't want to be involved in that discipline. They want central office, or they want the office, the administration to take care of it, but they're the first step in, still teaching that student what the expectations are. So
And ideally, they're the one with the relationship, so they're the ones that are going to be most effective.
Hey, Gary, can I
Mr.
just
Grum?
say this before this in the integrated student supports, tier 1 plan is exactly what you're
Yes.
talking about. It is explicitly what is your plan as a school to teach behaviors and to continually reinforce expectations. Like I think about, that is literally exactly this. And I'll be just quite frank. We talked about this summer, had every school design a tier 1 plan. We got together early in the fall and said, bring your plan, and not everybody has a plan, to what Dr. Robertson is saying. Sometimes we're not as explicit as we think we are, and so we're really trying to cultivate
and when
that.
are those supposed to be turned into the community superintendent?
They all have them.
all have them,
They're
right?
all in, yeah, they're alternate. And let's be fair, some of them, to some points that have been made, are really strong. They're real explicit, real specific. And some have opportunity for us to continue to grow. But like you guys have heard, academic press and personalization, in the personalization goal in every single one of our schools this year, is the only thing that we're like, everyone has to have tier 1 plan as part of their goal, where they're explicitly saying how they're teaching behaviors and communicating those regularly in schools. It's to your point. You know, but there's a lot of development still to do as a system.
I know. I don't want to ignore Larry. We have 5 minutes.
On November 30th, the two of you and Mr. Wingate and I were at East Hamilton Middle School, where it was so bad. Dr. Robinson, how many parents do you think were at that meeting?
Man, I'm terrible at this. I'd say 125 maybe.
Okay, I agree with that. So it was so bad that many parents showed up because of the tier 1 discipline plan that was in place that would actually allow a student at the very minimum, to be assaulted or physically attacked 1, 2, or 3 times, to be assaulted 3 times, and to be attacked 1, 2, or 3 times before they were even supposed to be referred to an assistant principal or a principal.
I know you mentioned this in meeting right after that, and I didn't address it, and I regretted that. I do think there are some issues with that tier 1 plan and with consistently implemented, but that statement that you're making, I think you're misinterpreting what was in that plan.
Okay, we can discuss that, but based upon the black and white of the consequences, that's what I get out of it.
Yep.
So what changed? What did you do? What has been done since November 31st for that father who stood up when you said, when you say you are going to be personally responsible for the safety of his daughter, what was done? He said to you, what are you going to do tonight or tomorrow where I can go home and tell my 12-year-old daughter who has been attacked, bullied, assaulted, that it's safe for her to go to school? And what is your definition of the principal and you both saying that you will be held personally responsible?
Yeah. So
And this is just one example of what's been going on for years in our schools and what we have allowed to take place, in my opinion. We are bending over backwards for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and to affirm kids and allow them to stay in classrooms, as just about all of us sitting up on this dais would say, are negatively impacting the majority of students who are only there, as you said, and for most females, which goes all the way up. All the research says that females are more compliant to authority, and therefore they're more successful in educational environment. They're also more successful in the work environment after they get out of their education. So what does it mean, Justin? And what has been done to change things? We sit here, we talk, we give our opinions, we have separate communications with you. I told you why I'm getting called from parents in District 7. There's a reason for that. But why am I getting calls from teachers in Red Bank and Ottawa and Harrison Bay? And, there's a reason for this. I I spoke to a teacher just a couple of days ago who claimed that she resigned because of an affirmation policy for a student at Red Bank Middle School this spring. She just said, that's 9 years of experience of a teacher that left. I have personally spoken to 4 other teachers that have quit in the last year or 2 for the exact same reasons, or left our district for other districts. My wife won't substitute in Hamilton County Public Schools anymore because of her experience in feeling unsafe in our schools. Think about that, a retired Army nurse who is a war veteran is afraid to go into one of our public schools. To me, that's reprehensible. So when we sit here and say we're going to do something about this, and I say that the direction of discipline in our district comes straight from you two, that's what I mean when I define personal responsibility. So, with that being said, I am going to put forth at the next school board meeting a policy which 90 of the 95 school districts, county school districts in the state of Tennessee has on student-owned wireless devices. We can't have a system to where we don't have a district-wide policy and schools are allowed to determine their own policy. Some of our schools have no policy at all. Some of our schools have very restrictive policies. Some are somewhere in between. Some have different consequences. And as I mentioned to you today in a text message, we're getting ready to rezone Hickson and Brainerd and Eastridge. And those schools have different cell phone policies. Eastridge has no policy. And what I've heard from teachers at that school is that that's been part of the problem of some of the discipline issues there, because students are using their cell phones to communicate and cause disruptions in the school. So something has to change. And how we take this huge ship that's trying to travel in one direction and get it to turn around is not going to be easy. As Mr. Wingate said, it's going to be very, very hard. It's going to be very stressful. But if we don't do it, what's going to happen is even worse. And that's what's happening right now. Thank you.
Okay. He asked a lot of questions. Do you want to
Yeah,
respond?
no, there are just a couple of things that I can't let pass,
Sure.
to be honest with you. I think it's, we're mixing, and this is happening, we're talking about culture coming into our schools. This is
Right.
happening politically.
Mm-hmm.
The conversation around diversity and equity is not what the issue was at East Hamilton. And when we talk about me being personally responsible, I carry a heavy weight. I mean, I tell you, I do. If I told you last year wasn't stressful, I'd be lying to you. It carry a heavy weight. There are a number of things we've done at East Hamilton. I was at East Hamilton that night till almost 11 o'clock. I was meeting with the principal 2 days later for 4 hours. Been back to that school in the, 8 days that it's been in session, or maybe not even 8 days. It may have only been 6 days. I've been over there probably 4 hours over 2 different visits, met with teachers, spoken to teachers on the phone. We worked on their tier 1 plan, worked on their expectations. Teachers had input, parents had input on changes to their school codes. We've done quite a bit at East Hamilton. Added staff at East Hamilton. So we've done quite a bit there. And I appreciate you bringing up, like, I'm responsible. But I take that burden, and am excited about what we're doing to move forward. It's a big ship, you're right. It's hard to move. I think you're going to see, and some of you have seen in the one-on-one meetings that we've had, that this conversation, the things that we've heard over the last year, the things that we've heard from the community will show up in what, all people say, show me your checkbook. That's what you're going to see, and what we present to you in a budget that we've heard and that we're moving in that direction. I would love to talk to you about that policy before we put it out there. We can't, out of one side of our mouth, say that we want schools to have defined autonomy, and to others say we've got to have a district policy to address an issue. So before we move in that direction, I'd love to talk to you about that.
Sure.
Sorry, I couldn't let that pass.
No, absolutely. I appreciate everybody joining us tonight. I know that our goal for this committee is to look at this issue and come up with some recommendations around how this is going to affect our budget, and where we want to put, where we feel like the most effective way or place to put our money is when addressing discipline. I appreciate the reminder from Mr. Keene that discipline is teaching. The root of the word discipline is disciple. I used to teach that all the time in my parenting classes for foster parents. And so it is a type of teaching, and all of it is important. We're going to get together via email, find another date for the second meeting for this committee. I appreciate those in attendance. Thanks so much. Have a good night.